Hello, everyone, and welcome to Botmock's AMA about getting hired as a conversation designer. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We have registrants from everywhere, and we wanted to welcome you and welcome our panelists today. So we had lots of questions submitted from lots of people, and we would love for you to introduce yourself in the chat. So let us know where you're tuning in from, what part of the world are you in, and what is your experience with conversation design? So before we get started, while people are still joining in, we have a retweet contest going on. So if you would like a Botmock mask, you can click this tweet now button in the bottom right. And this is actually a pretty nice mask. We get them off Etsy. And the Botmock team has chosen an emoji randomly. So if your retweet's emoji matches ours, we will send you a mask. So just go ahead and click retweet with comment. Pick any emoji at random. And then send it off. And we will let everyone know who the winners are at the end. So, quick notes, this session is being recorded and we will email you the recording. And as we go, feel free to ask questions or put comments into the chat. The panelists will be talking to everyone in that chat. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. So, first, Rachel. Rachel Bond is the founder and CEO of Jubal Health. After about a decade in life sciences and digital health consulting for the world's largest biotech and biopharma companies, she founded Jubal with a mission to empower individuals and couples on their quest to form and build a family through a personalized AI-enabled fertility and concierge platform. Jubal guides and supports people through their journey, from preconception to fertility to pregnancy and beyond, using a virtual conversational AI platform that delivers medically vetted content and access to health and wellness resources and experts. Rachel is passionate about the use of conversational AI as a driving force in patient engagement that will change the outcomes of parents and children for fertility, pregnancy, and healthcare at large. Thanks so much for joining us today, Rachel. All right, and Lisa. Lisa Foxen is currently a senior VUI, or Voice User Interface Designer at Amazon. She is the editor and author of Ubiquitous Voice, Essays from the Field, and has over 15 years of industry and research experience, specializing in the design, development, and deployment of natural speech and multimodal experiences. Her most recent work includes next-generation voice user interfaces at NIO and CloudCar, as well as Amazon's first speech-enabled products, Fire TV, Fire Phone, and Echo and Alexa. Prior to that, she focused on early iPad and iPhone interfaces at Vulio and speech-enabled IVR applications at Nuance. Lisa holds a BSEE from Stanford and an MSEE from UCLA. Thank you so much for joining us, Lisa. All right, and Hillary. Hillary Black is a co-founder and the head of marketing and conversation design at Mob, the AI assistant for fintech customer acquisition experiences. She is also the creator of the conversation design Facebook community, Chatbot Conversation Designers Internet Club, creator of the online course, Chatbot Writing and Design from UX Writers Collective, and a contributor to Discover.bot and Alexa.com, both Amazon companies. She believes that conversational AI is the future of business, and that future needs writers, designers, and strategists to help create amazing experiences for customers. Thank you so much for joining us, Hillary. And Cameron. Cameron has been recruiting for 9 years starting in tech and spending the last 5 years building design and hardware teams for world-class product teams. He has been recruiting voice designers for almost 2 years and scaling this practice at his current company globally. This has involved educating tech and design leaders on the nuances of voice design and talent in the market and how that relates to current and future business needs. Cameron has also been an internal advocate of voice design training, defining role requirements, and building voice practices within the greater design organizations. Though not a voice designer himself, he likes to spend time researching and learning about tools and voice design best practices to better understand the talent field and to be an internal advisor and hiring in this niche field. Thanks so much for joining us, Cameron. All right, and thank you all for introducing yourself in the chat. And let's get started with the first question. So everyone checked this question, and Lisa, if you want to take this one on first. What skills or experience are you looking for in potential candidates that you are wanting to hire?
This is very relevant as this year I've been building my team. I started the year with 2 designers and hired 3 more. So really right now I'm looking for folks who already have GUI experience. It can be as little as a year. I hired someone who was only 5 years of work experience, but 1 year design for Google Actions. And the background actually, people always ask me, well, you have an engineering degree. Do I need to have a technical degree, computer science? And I point out that, about half the people that I work with that are voice designers are linguists. And then the other half maybe have more of a engineering degree, but there's also people like screenwriters, people with drama backgrounds. So it's really about the actual skills. And I'm looking specifically for candidates who kind of have a real well thought out process of how they approach design problems. So they start with a customer problem. They work backwards from there, and they think through how the conversation should sound first, instead of jumping into creating flow diagrams and generalizations. They actually start with just the conversation first. So that's basically what I'm looking for. Also, just somebody who can really present well in front of leadership. We have a ton of presentations where we need to share ideas. You need to be able to defend your designs as well. Not just put it up there, but be able to explain the design decisions that you made, and that's hard for some folks. But you also need to be able to compromise. We work really closely with our product and engineering partners, and you have to understand when something can't be implemented, whether you need to make compromises there, or you need to make compromises to the design due to the time frame. So I think somebody who's really flexible is important in terms of personality as well.
Lisa, Rachel.
Is it working? Can you see me? I agree with what Lisa said. I think I'll just paint a different perspective as a digital health company, a bit more early stage. So we're looking for a variety of things, and it would be ideal. I'm just going to name some technical things that would be ideal if you had it all in one package. I start with like user experience design and thinking through it is what Lisa said, that process mindset. For us, if you want to call it a patient, which could be a person, a consumer, a user, but really understanding the journey of that person, to be able to think about the voice of what that person needs along that journey. On top of that, I think some level of being technically savvy. I mean, to get something into the effects of a chat bot, you need to understand, if not code yourself. You don't have to code yourself, but to be able to understand and speak the language with our technical team. For what we do anyway, data science is an added skill set. So a lot of what we do is drive personalization of recommendations. So the ability to grab data elements and build that out into our algorithms. There's a heavy content writing side as well. And it's even better if that person can understand the technical writing jargon of the medical clinical community. And again, that may be specific because we're in the healthcare industry. Even more so, we're in the fertility industry, so that's an added bonus for us. And yeah, I really think being able to put yourself in the user's shoes, I'd say user, but just as the person, to understand how to mimic a real conversation. So those are some of the technical skills, and I think on top of that, there's the soft stuff, right? The can-do attitude, highly motivated, team player, self-starter, figure it out kind of person. So that's what we see anyway.
Hillary, you're up next.
Yeah, so I am in a little bit of a different situation too, like similar to Rachel. My company is a startup and we are a product company. So our product is really driving what the designs are for. So we have these playbooks that are mostly SMS and are run for customer acquisition. And so since this is a very new field and we are a startup, I'm not looking for a lot of the like technical qualifications, and I am not necessarily looking for people who have experience actually doing conversation design. But it's more about the ability to be flexible and the desire to learn what you're doing, and just the willingness to be able to adapt, especially in a startup. You know, things are changing a lot and there's not necessarily a clear process of how things are done. We're sort of adapting and learning from our previous processes how we're going to do that in the future. In terms of actual sort of work experience or general interest, I always look for people who have like what I call like a micro copy state of mind. So someone who may have done website copywriting, social media copywriting, someone who really understands how to sort of fit effective messaging into a very small space, especially with SMS, which is our primary channel. And so people who are able to utilize all of the features and functions and are very passionate about this type of technology, but not necessarily someone who is able to develop or comes from a technical background, because we do have a tech team who builds all of our bots. We're very fortunate in that you wouldn't need to know how to code. I personally don't know how to code. But for me, like the most thing is that you have these strong opinions that this is the future, that you want to learn, and you're always looking for ways and even bringing to the table ways that you think that things could be improved. So just understanding why something is done and being able to explain why you're having a certain strategic approach to the decisions that you're making with the copy.
Thanks, Hillary. Cameron, you want to finish off this question for us?
A lot of ground has been covered already that I wanted to say as well, but I think what I would add is typically I really would like to have someone that has a decent amount of experience within the voice design space. Now, like Lisa said, we can also bring in folks that don't have a lot. What I really look for is aptitude to learn if you don't have a long history of voice design. So what I mean by that is being able to kind of decipher through conversations what are new technologies that candidates are learning themselves on their own because they have a strong desire to do that. They have a big curiosity in that area, and they kind of hopefully have a track record of doing that before, whether they're a couple years in the industry or many years, and they've been doing it the whole time. So that's one of the big things that I think can set people apart. Another is, again, that human-centered design process and thinking is really key coming into, especially a product company, as opposed to professional services, slightly different in sometimes what the scope of work could be. Sometimes it's more business versus customer, just depending on the type of company. So there's some variant levels there, but I think the big thing for me is I look for aptitude if I don't see a lot of experience on paper.
Thanks so much, Cameron. On to the next question. Rachel, if you'd like to start us off, what would make a candidate with no experience competitive?
Here, I'm going to build on what Cameron was just saying. I think, aptitude is a word. I would also describe it as, and again, this may be startup specific, well, it's not startup specific, but I think it's definitely important in a startup, is that someone is a learning monster. They're just willing to go at it and figure it out. They don't have to have experience to do that well. You can pick up some. We've had 2 people, for example, that maybe had some background in writing or healthcare and did not have like the technical side of or design background, and they picked it up. They just learned it. So I think if you're willing to try and willing to roll up your sleeves and figure it out, then that's really attractive for us.
Hillary.
So similar to what I said in the last question, and actually when I started as a conversation designer about 3 years ago, I had no experience. And so I often look for people who don't have experience, because I think a lot of startups too, and like I have my own design process that I do. And so I want someone who is willing to sort of learn with me. And so I don't necessarily look for people with that years of experience, but what I think that people can do to set themselves apart, especially, is to create your own examples. So you might not have, worked for a company that has built bots before, but there are plenty of tools out there that you can use to build your own. And so you can create your own process. You can create your own tone of voice. You can really create this concrete example that you can then show to people and say, this is what I did. This is why I made these decisions. This is, what I think about how this copy should be written. And I think that writing about your experience while doing that and just documenting exactly what you're doing is a great way to create a portfolio of examples that are concrete, different types of examples, when you haven't done that in a professional setting. And so I think that like creating your own content is something that I absolutely, if someone came to me with that, I would be incredibly impressed by them.
And Rachel. All right. So Lisa, how can people from a non-designer background transition using both previous experience and new design skills?
I was the equivalent of a language engineer when I started Nuance Communications many years. What I found and how I ended up doing design is that as I was tuning these, very fixed grammars that we used to before speech recognition got so good, is that people were saying these really wacky things back to these prompts, and I couldn't figure out in a lot of cases why they were saying these things. And then I would go back and I'd look at the design, and or I'd look at the flow of the whole conversation. I'd see that they were confused, but either by the question or the ordering of the questions, or something about the conversation was confusing to them, and it was leading them down a wrong path where they were saying something that the speech recognition wasn't expecting. And so that's when I really got into design, and I realized I could make a larger impact kind of working on the front end. In the context of this question, so that's kind of exactly the transition that I made, is that I kind of looked at it as it was a data problem. Why is the data, so bad? What can I do to fix the system to match, to accommodate these data issues? And then I worked from there to how can I fix the entire design for the customer or the user. And so I just learned by doing. I was lucky at the time. I was in a professional services organization where I was surrounded by dialogue designers. That's what they were called then. And I basically just started by those folks and got plenty of time, chances to jump in and review my designs with more experienced folks. About 3 people at Amazon who are in totally different roles. 2 are language engineers, and 1 is software developer. They're both really interested in voice design, and this is what we're doing, is kind of taking what their strengths are in their current role and seeing how we can apply it. So the language engineers, for example, are really strong in understanding how Alexa understands and processes the speech, and So they're really good in terms of understanding what responses will be accepted, but they need help in response. And so they're shadowing on my team to do that. And then the software engineer is really, she's just deeply technical software side, but has done very little design. She has no sort of design process. And so we're looking at how, you start with simple dialogues and work from there to generalize to flows. So in all those cases, they have great skills that are applicable. They just kind of what I've been suggesting is, as much as you can find like a mentor or someone to shadow, and then just really start learn by doing. And I think one of the other panelists mentioned that there are a lot of ways to learn their tools. You can basically put together a portfolio of skills or actions, and sort of showcase what you think a good voice design would be without actually having to do it internally, in an Amazon or a Google or someplace like that. So I think practice is really important, and also being able to, as Cameron pointed out, aptitude. We look for people who can analyze existing designs and really speak to some of the design decisions that were made, and articulate why certain compromises were made. So really understanding how experienced designers made certain decisions, I think, is important. So look at something that works really well, for example, on Alexa or Google, and analyze that and break it down in features, why these decisions were made. So that's what I would recommend in terms of transitioning, is just learn by doing and also evaluate what's out.
Awesome, thank you, Lisa. Rachel, would you like to answer this one as well?
Can you hear me? Hello? I heard Dale and she cut off. Hoping you guys can hear me. So I think that if you are a designer or you aren't a designer, like either way, there's thank you, Cameron. If you are a designer or you aren't a designer, either way, there's challenges. For us, when we started, we kind of didn't set out to go create a chatbot or conversation AI tool. But when I realized that's what we were doing, and that was, part of the feature that would be able to create something scalable to give people personalized, medically vetted education information, the most obvious thing, I was at Deloitte before, and I had worked with, different UX design. I'd worked with technical teams. I had looked at, my background in healthcare. I'd looked at patient journeys, with be it diabetes or any other area, and thought through how those pieces fit together. But when I was looking and trying to recruit designers, I kept coming across UX and UI, and I think that what was missing was, okay, but can you be like content oriented? Can you write? Can you take it to that next level beyond how to map out the experience of clicking buttons and things like that? So the challenge is that it's a new field, and we have to create the talent. We have to have people come in, roll up their sleeves, like I say. And I think for the people that have worked in doing this for us, and I did it myself first, they've all become designers in a way through that. So just speaking more pragmatically, I think, opportunities to actually transition if you're not a designer, and I've seen people do it over and over again. So I think having a leg up in the subject matter is beneficial. If you can learn that and master it, it will then give you more expertise or the opportunity to really look at, if you kind of had a timeline view, like what is that experience of a conversation that someone really wants to have to make it seamless, to make it less robotic. I think you can supplement the traditional UX things like user research and market research, like that can help you really grasp that area. You can always go take more design classes if you don't understand UX in general, because designing conversation also involves understanding an overall product or technology experience, app, be it what you may. I think sentiment analysis is a hot buzzword, that being able to understand how to deliver the right human voice behind it is key. And I think if you're not design savvy, then hopefully, at least what we've done on the team, is we supplement that with some traditional UX design, and then you start to create a new type of role or skill set. So that's it. I'd say one more thing. I think to remember that it's interpersonal. This is not just designing a robotic conversation. It's very much not just technology and engineering. It is to try to replicate a interpersonal interaction.
Thanks, Rachel. Cameron, where are some of the best markets for conversation design?
There are definitely a couple that come to mind, but I like to start with, as many people know, voice designers traditionally, at least over time and beginning in the early 2000s, a lot, I would say a large bulk of the market can and has worked remote at least at some point. So that's been, I think, one of the most, that's one of the trends that I've seen the most, where folks can be in Omaha or Florida, or it doesn't really matter where you are when it comes to North America, you can still deliver voice design. And I think COVID, the crazy time and sad time that it is, it's also really pushed a lot of companies to kind of think a little bit more outside the box if they weren't already. Professional services, typically like a Nuance, they've already been very open to this, and so it's not new for a lot of voice designers. But I will just start with that because I think that's maybe a known but sometimes unknown thing about movie designers. But I think the big market, Bay Area, definitely is probably the most saturated market with talent, for sure. New York is another big one. Seattle, of course. Boston, a lot of speech technology going on there in different forms. I've also seen pockets within Southern California and even in the DC area. I would say a little bit more chatbot experience in the DC area, but there's other pockets too. But those are the major ones that I've seen. Chicago as well. I've seen really great talent there, and outside of the U.S., I've personally just started to explore that. So I think the EU is a spot where I've found some really great talent. London, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, kind of all over the place. So that's a new market for me that I've been exploring.
Rachel, where are some of the best markets for conversation design?
Graphical, maybe because we have a remote team, and I'm biased here. Again, I think in looking at industries, I feel that healthcare is a good market or use case due to the nature of trying to augment and mimic, as I said, the feeling of texting or conversing with your friend, or be it a doctor, someone that's a confidant, someone that you trust. We're not trying to replace human interaction by far, but I really use the word augment and mean that. And we all probably know too well, there's a lot of customer service bots out there, and you'd imagine you don't feel like you're having any level of interpersonal conversation with them. So I don't know if that's necessary. Any industry can use conversational AI and conversational design, but I think it's where you can get it right and having, or the most needed areas are where you really don't have enough. You want more human interaction, but you don't necessarily have enough. Industries that probably, or markets that probably are a little bit odd to me, are like the movie Her, in the dating world. So the use of conversation design as it relates to creating chatbots and robots to talk to, that one's a little bit odd. I also saw, Riel, there was a question above. I don't know if we hit on in the chat about conversation design opportunities seem fairly limited right now, and how quickly do we see the field growing? Just to that point, I think that the traditional app that we have today and the way of using that, I see more and more of every product in some way, shape, or form using chatbots on their web pages. Like, it's everywhere, that I think the future of technology is really integrating more holistically the ability to converse and talk with different bots everywhere and anywhere. So I think there's plenty of opportunities out there, and it's growing rapidly.
All right. And Hillary, who would I be working with as a conversation designer? Which roles on the team would I interface with regularly?
Yeah. So I can talk a bit too to both being internal teams and then as well as external teams. So my company initially started as an agency, so we would provide services to clients and to other agencies, and that's still true today as like a SaaS platform. We work directly with customers and with different parts of their team. So in terms of outside, like what you need to do is, meet with clients and meet with their editorial team, their social media team, and usually the sales team as well to sort of gather all the information that you need, and make sure that you are taking into account any style guide that already exists for the company that you're working with. That's a really, really important one when we're talking about understanding how to create an avatar for a different company. You need to understand what already exists within them, and then how you can use that to improve on it and to boil it down into, a bot or whatever you are designing for. And then internally, obviously working with the tech team. And so I'll work with, our internal salespeople to sort of say, okay, who is this customer? What are their needs? What platforms are we developing on? And what is the experience going to be? Like, what's the onboarding and everything? And then I will work with our tech team to say, here's the script that I've created, and then here's what I need in order to make that real. We need to have this sort of intent detection. We need to be on these platforms. We need to have this sort of performance metrics that we're tracking. And I work very closely with our tech team to make sure that the experience is created in the way that it is in my mind and the way that it is on my piece of paper. And so that we can both work together to sort of say, how can we make this experience the best for customers and then also for the clients that we're serving.
Lisa, who would I be working with as a conversation designer, and which roles on the team would I interface with?
I'm not you anyway. I'll just chime in on this one. So for us, like who our conversation designers work with, and again, can like look at that like Hillary internal and externally. I think because all of the skill sets I started out with, I think that it's hard to find that in one person. Then every single component of our team, be it technology to marketing to design to content strategy, product strategy, all of those pieces have to talk to each other and finish each other's sentences in a way and know what each other does. So they're working with each other and me day to day. I think externally, with respect to what we're building, has a lot of medical content, as I keep referencing. So there's the connections to our physicians and clinicians, professionals that help contribute into our content. So working with them as well as the people and individuals that are on our product as they chat with us, and maybe we get it right, maybe we don't. You have to work with them to be able to improve it.
Awesome, thank you, Rachel. Lisa, is your audio working now?
Okay. So,
yeah, we can hear you.
Basically, really working very product and engineering partners. So, Amazon has a leadership principle called earned trust, and that's about being able to work closely with your partner. Possible experience for the customer. And I think one thing that I really learned more at Amazon than anywhere else is how to compromise and when to push back. Meet a tight time frame, cut a corner, and where does it impact the experience, the customer experience, and how do I articulate that certain compromises can or can't be made. And I think that's something that I've gotten much better at later in my career, whereas early in my career when I worked at Nuance in professional services, it really was just whatever my customer said was law. And so if you handed off a design and there were certain areas had to make those changes. And so you're really kind of captive to whatever their desires were, even if they didn't necessarily work well for the end customer. And so I think what's right now, I job at Amazon and my friends that are at Facebook and Google and Apple, that is that we get to design directly for the end customer, right? There's no business who's telling us what to do. We're looking out for the end customer from the beginning. And that means, but you still need to meet timeframes and you still need to work within the constraints of the technology. And that's where your product and engineering partners become really important.
Your audio sounds good now.
I actually have
All right.
actually teach an
Cameron,
internal course at Amazon.
How and
teach,
where do you
external, but I can talk a little bit more.
Oh. Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. Cameron, do you want to go ahead with how and where you look for talent?
Yes, multiple channels. I like to go to folks that I know internally kind of first, and just understanding who they know in this network that could be interested or could be bored at their current role. So it's usually a go-to, kind of referencing just the chat I put in there as well. Networking is really important for such a small pool of people that are doing this actual work. I think is kind of number one for me. Number two, there's kind of there's several places that I do look within professional services. I also do a lot of research on whose chatbot or IVR experience is rated highly, and so finding out what companies those are and who had the contracts to actually design and deliver those if they weren't done in-house. And so that's kind of where I start as far as like where I look. And like Lisa had said earlier, and a couple other folks, it could be folks' background could vary greatly. Of course, very senior folks like Lisa with a lot of experience on their resume to folks that are coming from a writing background, acting background, and have been in the space only a short time period. But it's really about cultivating those relationships and understanding if we get on a call, really that aptitude, if they don't have a lot of experience delivering end-to-end voice experiences. So, but geographically, I think I talked about some of the hotspots, but it also could be anywhere because of the remote aspect and just recently getting into the EU market. So I'm not an expert in that area yet, but started to do some hiring recently. But yeah, that's usually where I start.
Awesome. Thank you, Cameron. Hillary, how and where do you look for talent?
I definitely look on LinkedIn. That's like probably my primary place where I'm looking, mostly because there are a lot of people who are interested or experienced or not experienced in conversation design on there who are, as I mentioned before, like creating that content about it, sharing content about it, sharing their perspectives and their examples. And it's just a really good way to sort of consume what people are doing and get introduced to new people. So I would definitely say if you aren't on LinkedIn and if you aren't connecting with other people, whether it's someone that you want to work for or one of your peers, it's just good to have those connections with people, because I pretty much always default to going to my network first, as what I see Cameron mentioned in the chat, like using your network to say, hey, I'm interested in pursuing a career in conversation design. Let me know if you hear of anything. I personally repost a lot of jobs that I see. And then additionally, as Brielle mentioned in my intro, I have a Facebook group where it's just about conversation design. So there's a lot of people in there. And of course, I'm going to go there first when I know here's a bunch of people who are all interested in this, who are looking for work or hiring or anything like that. So I will both post jobs there and then also look for people and refer people who I know, especially if I see a job that's from a different country or that is from you know, a different type of company that I wouldn't necessarily work for or know someone, or, you know, if I'm not looking for full-time work and I'm only looking for freelance work, there's just a lot of different types of people at different levels of experience. So certainly look through different networking type of groups outside of just Facebook. You know, I know there's a community that's like pretty global on Discord as well. And so just making sure that you're sort of networking with all those people, letting them know what you're looking for, what's your experience, where are you based? And that's a really good way to sort of get visibility into what's going on in hiring.
Hillary, and would you mind linking to your Facebook community in the chat?
And I'll grab the link to the Discord as well.
Thank you. All right, Lisa.
I back a lot of what these folks have said. You know, luckily I have an amazing recruiting team. Cameron is actually the one who has helped me hire the last 3 people for my team. So I kind of rely on him for some of the sourcing, but a lot of these are also through connections, as folks have said. So it's either people I've worked with before at previous companies, or colleagues of people I've worked with before, you know, people who are 1 or 2 degrees sort of connected to me. The other place I would say when I go is when I go to conferences, and I tend to meet people there, you know, crazy things like, you know, we've been 1 degree apart for our entire careers, and, you know, for 15, 20 years. And so you get this opportunity to talk to folks live, which unfortunately now everything's virtual. It's not as good for networking, but definitely have met some good candidates at conferences where we just do like a coffee, set up a coffee chat, and we talk about what opportunities are in Amazon or in the field. If they don't have the right experience for me, sometimes I refer them to a friend who's looking for someone with more similar experience. Or we just kind of create a connection, and as they like continue in their career, maybe later on, there's a good fit. So I think conferences is another place. And you know, through internships is one thing that I'm trying to look at now. And I think the challenge is, I did have a vui intern. The challenge is to find somebody who really is passionate and has aptitude. Is very hard, I think, for someone who's maybe 20, 21 in college to really know even what voice design is enough to know that they want to pursue it. So I think you might have better luck with a grad student, but I certainly wouldn't rule out like a really talented student bringing someone on as an intern and then sort of using that as a trial, sort of to see if they could migrate into a full-time hire. So that's something that I'm certainly looking at. Would love for this is sort of a wish thing, but in the future to offer more more courses and more resources for folks in universities to teach voice design.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, Rachel, what are the necessary qualifications, courses, or background for conversation design? We've sort of touched on this so far, but do you have anything specific?
What the new versions of, if there is, like General Assembly or, you know, coding boot camps, like what the equivalent of that is for conversation design. I'm sure you guys would. We just happen to have had a lot of different folks, like from Masters Public Health, for example, that have joined, and then they've really gotten more involved in, well, they've learned on the job, right, and then have grown with it. So I think a hybrid, I guess, of understanding from qualification standpoint, our courses like data science is helpful. Sometimes you have like a content writer, but then you have all this data component to it. So if people could take more courses, for example, on the data science side. Or if you don't understand UX design, but you understand writing, then you would want to fill that gap. So I think to some extent, like UX, if you don't have that, understanding data science and machine learning or natural language processing, those kinds of things are helpful.
Cameron, what are the necessary qualifications, courses, or someone's background?
You know, voice is interesting. I've recruited for a lot of different roles in tech and non-tech. I think voice design is unique because it has the most paths leading to an actual role within voice design than any other role I've worked on for any type of team. So, which is great. I look for, I mean, mainly speaking from an education standpoint, folks can have a degree in psychology, to creative writing, to computer science, to neuroscience. They could have a background designing IVRs, chatbots in combination with a UX background. Chatbot doesn't always translate to GUI headless design. It does a lot of the time, but just kind of depends if someone has kind of that combination of chatbot and UX. So those are some of the things I look for. I mean, writing is a big part. We've had several people even internally work in a writing role and transition to voice design quite well. But it's really finding someone that has hopefully the human-centered design background and potentially they have a really interesting depth within linguistics or IVR design, chatbot writing, and it's just trying to understand like how they've put all those skills together to actually produce and design end-to-end experiences. Now, someone doesn't always have to have a lot of end-to-end by themselves design experience. They can be working with another designer and really filling in more on the more functional component level. But someone that has seen the process before, hopefully at least once or twice at minimum, from doing end-to-end voice design is typically, and that's general and it's kind of a baseline, but those are the areas that I look at and look for in candidates.
Thanks, Cameron. All right, Lisa, does Amazon hire new conversation designers or is prior experience a requisite? And does your company have any unique requirements for this role? X tech or soft skills others don't ask for, and why this skill?
Yeah, so I would say right now, probably no on hiring new conversation designers. But as I said, as little as 1 year experience. And I think as our team grows, particularly my team, because I have 4 designers now working for me with a spread of design experience, I would maybe next year be open to hiring someone who was either fresh out of school or had experience in other roles in industry, but not specifically in conversation design. The exception I would say is this internship that I do think if someone is a really promising intern, they come for a summer, generally we give them a offer at the end of the summer for them to start after they graduate. So right now we're not hiring folks with 0 experience, but I think that is something that I know at least my team, which is one of the larger sort of core teams designing for Alexa, would be looking at that fairly soon. And then in terms of unique requirements for the role, I think Amazon in general has unique requirements for all roles that are around leadership principles, which you can look up, like Google it, Amazon leadership principles, and it'll show you a whole long list. I think specifically for conversation design, some of those leadership principles are more important than others. And so I'd specifically call out customer obsession, because that's kind of the #1 thing that you have to do. Keep in mind when you're writing a good customer experience via vui. But I would say also insist on high standards is one as well, where you have to really focus on quality. And I think Another one we have is about committing, which is really hard for some folks to learn, which is sometimes you have to disagree with a decision, but if you're outnumbered or overruled by management or whatever it is, you have to really commit to what the solution is and move forward. So I have no problem with the disagree part. I always challenged by the committing that comes afterwards. But I think it's really important to be able to compromise and raise your objections. I have, for example, blocked launch of a new feature myself, just being the only dissenter representing design because I felt it wasn't ready. And so we ended up pushing out. It was only a few weeks, before this feature got out there. But to me, it was really important because I was very focused on quality. So I think there are a few kind of qualities that Amazon looks for in designers, and those are some of the ones that I would say are most important.
Great insights. Rachel, what are the biggest challenges when working as a conversation designer?
As a founder, you have to do everything yourself before you can train someone else on how to do it or know what skill set you need. So I learned myself in designing conversations for our very first product that you can't do it in a box or a vacuum. It has to factor in marketing voice, the unmet needs of the customer, the consumer. What are the algorithms and the use of data that drive that conversation? It has to be driven with the right tone, driven from research from users, feasible to code, other limitations in our regulatory environment, for example. So all these things happen, and it doesn't happen in a box. I think for us, we're also using, I guess what I compare as like historical chat bots, like customer service bots that are used in a more administrative way. I think for us, we use a chat bot in a very depth. It has a lot of content depth to it. So think about the mind of a physician, for example, and medical textbook, and trying to break that down into bite-sized nuggets where people can actually understand it. That's really hard. So that's one of the challenges, is just trying to deal with technology and limitations and the depth and substance of what we're trying to deliver. And the fact that it does have so many moving parts to it, it's not in that box.
Hillary, what are the biggest challenges when working as a conversation designer?
So I would say my biggest challenges from like a customer perspective is that a lot of times the conversation design is unfortunately coming second. And so a lot of times people are creating automated experiences and they're creating them, with their tech team. They didn't think that they need to bring in a designer to actually help them write this copy. And so that's why we see there are a lot of bad experiences out there. There's a lot of broken experiences. There's a lot of experiences that seem as if they were written by a computer. And so that's where we're seeing that the design is actually coming after the product has been built. And so that's one of the very biggest challenges that I face, is making sure that people understand, that customers understand, that my team understands that conversation design and strategy need to be a part of it from day one. It needs to be embedded in how the experience is going to play out. And to me, obviously, it's one of the most important things. It's the most important thing about the experience. Of course, you want it to work with the technology, but you also want it to be a good experience. And, my personal belief is that I refuse to put out anything that doesn't have an actual strategy, that doesn't have an actual plan of how the conversation is going to flow out. And so that's certainly a challenge that I have faced over the years, working with other various clients in different businesses. And then, from the perspective of people who might be watching this, is, as you've seen, there's no real blueprint on how to become a conversation designer. There's no real way in that's proven, that's easy. You go to college, you get a major, and then you get a job. That doesn't exist in this field. And so that definitely can feel challenging for new designers. But to me, like, that's just an opportunity. The opportunity is there's creative ways that you can get into the field, and there's creative ways that you can build your portfolio, that you can get jobs, that you can find new companies, or even start your own company. And so that's something that like is a challenge, but I also think that it can be used to your advantage a lot.
All right, and we have a couple more minutes. Cameron and Lisa, do you want to finish us off with what is the actual name of the role that you would post at the top of a job description? What exactly should I be searching for?
It's a great question. There's been a couple different titles that I've worked on roles for, mainly VUI designer, VUI. Sometimes that can be spelled out in job descriptions. But also I've seen anything like UX designer with voice in parentheses. From my experience, titles are titles from where I've been before and currently, and so it's not a huge deal what the title looks like. But typically looking for a VUI designer,
yeah, I've
or
also seen
UX
conversation
designer.
So
I
myself,
for
it's
folks.
funny because VUI designer has really only come up, I think, in the last like 5 years, like the default title. I prefer kind of voice UX, because similar to the way that UX designers prefer that over GUI, I think GUI is very limited. It's not the voice user interface only, it's the user experience, and it encompasses everything from, you know, working with research to prototyping and deployment. And so I think anytime you see like UX designer, you know, with and the words voice put together, that basically is kind of the role that we're talking about, and conversation design as well. So you can probably reliably, you know, what I would say is that there are, you know, from Cameron's perspective, he'll look sometimes and see a ton of people who just throw conversation designer or VUI designer into their LinkedIn, hoping that I'll kind of magically get picked up and they can find a job. And that, I would say, in terms of identifying what you do and who you are, say what you really do and can do, and then what you're interested in doing, and then let that speak for itself. Role and working in voice speak for itself. Don't kind of position yourself as VUI designer when you haven't actually done that job, and then you're gonna, you know, because you're gonna get caught in that situation. I really think it's about positioning what you can actually do, and then say what you'd like to grow into in terms of that role.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think one last thing, and there's probably still lots of debate on conversation designer versus voice designer and what those mean. And so we could probably have another hour talking about that, but I'll just leave that there.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists today. That was so insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your time, and to all the attendees, thank you for joining and for submitting your questions. We are having an October AMA that will be more hiring focused. So ask me anything about hiring a conversation designer. Similar topic, but a little bit of a different framing. So again, thank you everyone so much. Really amazing session. And Cameron, Lisa, Rachel, Hillary, you were amazing. And I hope everyone has a safe and fun weekend. We will be emailing the recording, and hopefully see all of you in the next AMA. Bye, everyone.